I will get started. Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to our next STEM Connector webinar in our What's Working series. My name is Ted Wells, and I am Vice President of Client Services at STEM Connector. 2020, what a year this has been for all of us. Since mid-March, we all know this story. We've changed our lives in order to approximate some sense of normalcy. For some activities, this has been a fruitless endeavor, right? We haven't been going to restaurants, or we didn't at the beginning. Maybe we are now, but it's a very, very different experience. Concerts on Zoom are not the same thing as being in a live music venue. And we find ourselves hoarding staples like paper towels, jigsaw puzzles, and even toilet paper. We all know what happened in schools. Teachers and students took to virtual conferencing platforms to approximate classrooms with mixed results. If available, parents were forced into a more active role as an academic coach and time manager, and enemy number one sometimes. And for our most vulnerable students, this digital access gap, our homework gap, and opportunity gap that had existed for a long time prior to the pandemic constrained environment were all exacerbated. As the school year was ending, it became clear that COVID mandated quarantines were going to continue in some places, or in some cases, we would reopen and then we would have another quarantine. So the summer months loomed large on the horizon for parents and for educators and for students, because if there's anything worse rather than being on a conference platform like Zoom or Google Classroom or whatever all day in the house, and parents making sure their students their children are being moved along. The thought of students not doing anything all day during the summer months is potentially even a worse option. So what happened? The same thing that's happened across the board: innovation. Our ingenious core of education professionals across the country figured out new ways to create a camp experience for students. And today's webinar is going to focus on 3 programs that adapted their summer camps into virtual camps with tremendous success. So we'll learn about how each camp adapted to this new reality, why this was so important to advance STEM learning, and how they overcame significant challenges throughout the process. We picked these presenters because they are leaders in the field. What I really like, though, is that they are all different. There's a different story in each one, so listen carefully. But I do see some common themes, and I just want to highlight those before we jump in, so you listen for them. Adapting to this virtual reality in camps is a problem just like any other problem. And you'll see that the methodologies employed are some of those design thinking methodologies that we try to cultivate in students through effective practice. A focus on equity is essential to an effective approach. And we have to learn from data. We can't run by the seat of the pants, and we've got to know if we're not succeeding, that's fine, but we need to know why not. So I hope you stay engaged with this topic. As always, we love your feedback and love your ideas. I encourage you to use the chat window right down at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen or wherever it is, and say hi to everybody on here. And you don't have to click the 3 dots and say more. But on the chat window, say hi to folks, say where you're from. I see people are doing that, and ask questions throughout the presentations that you're hearing. We will take the balance of our time at the end, and that's pretty much all the housekeeping notes. So let me go through who we have speaking today. First, we have, and I'll introduce each speaker just before they speak. So BP, we have Cindy Birkman, who's Associate Director of National Strategic Relationships and Initiatives. Then the Micron Technology Foundation, we have Kathy Amirati, who is STEM Diversity Outreach Manager, and Lori Anderson, who leads STEM education programs, Adventist STEM education programs for Micron Technology Foundation. And then our third speaker is from West Virginia University, Jen Robertson Honoker, is with West Virginia University Extension Service, is an associate professor and STEM specialist and director of Milan STEM Care. So a couple things going on. So our first speaker is Cindy Birkman. There she is. And Cindy Birkman is at BP America, and she's associate director of strategic initiatives She's based in Houston, where she's responsible for managing implementing BP's K-12 STEM outreach. Prior to joining BP, Cindy served in the energy industry as a product marketing manager at Halliburton, marketing director at Digital Oilfield, and marketing manager at Petrocosm, a collaboration of Texaco and Chevron. Cindy's background includes more than 25 years of experience in marketing, communications, and public relations, with a record of demonstrated success in strategy development, community engagement, relationship building, and program execution. Cindy and her colleagues at BP, hey Kathleen, if you're out there, have been working with us at STEM Connector and Million Women Mentors for many years. So I'm pleased to turn it over to my friend and longtime collaborator, Cindy Birkman.
Great, thank you, Ted. Let me share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that right now. Okay, so first of all, thank you. I am thrilled to be here today with you. And I really, really appreciate you, Ted, and all of your colleagues and STEM Connector for allowing BP to chime in on this incredibly important topic. Ted introduced me, but let me tell you just a little bit more about what I do. I work in BP's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, where we help to educate and empower students and communities, specifically focusing on girls and underrepresented minorities. Diversity and inclusion is at the heart of everything we do, especially with regard to STEM initiatives and outreach. Further to that, when we speak of diversity, we recognize the many strands of diversity, whether it be diversity of thought, culture, race, gender, ethnicity. We believe that diversity and global understanding breeds innovation. This is why we believe in the whole plethora of diversity strands. And that's really why I want to talk to you about the BP Global STEM Academies. That is the underlying theme, is diversity breeding innovation. So I'd also like to mention our partnership, as you see here on the first screen, with AFS and Cultural. While we are the funding partners and guiding partners for this program, AFS has been doing intercultural programs for more than 70 years, and it is their expertise that we rely on to administer the program in a global fashion. So let me tell you a little bit about the BP Global Academy, sort of a little bit of a background. We have been doing this since 2018, and it is an extraordinary full scholarship study abroad program for 110 students across the globe. The impetus for this is we want them to become global citizens who are energized to help solve some of today's largest challenges. Students go through a rigorous process involving written essays and one-on-one interviews. So it's quite a process to get accepted to our academies. As you can see, it's a 22.8% acceptance rate, and I understand that's even more difficult than Harvard. So what we also look at is the most deserving students. So this is the student who shows leadership, who shows passion and desire to be part of our academies and help their communities as a whole. So it's not necessarily the student that is at the top of their class. It's really the student who is most deserving. The other thing that we aim to do is to inspire students through experiential education that excites, engages, and enriches our diverse students. So we really think about enhancing and increasing access to education and improving social mobility, specifically focusing on aspects of diversity. Now, ideally for 2020, our chosen 110 scholars would have been attending one of our in-person academies, whether it be Brazil, US, Egypt, or India. But we all know that that didn't happen because of COVID. But we still understood the importance of keeping STEM as an imperative. So we quickly pivoted to develop the 2020 virtual academies. Now, here you can see a quick snapshot of our reinvented program. First, we decided our scholars would participate through a series of online webinars and activities and challenges for 2020, and then those same scholars would attend in person. So it's really a bonus year for them, as we also learn through the process. Our goal is to make the virtual program exciting, impactful, engaging, while still honoring the original learning objectives of STEM, global competence, diversity and inclusion, and especially social impact. And we actually believe that we achieved this and a lot more. But what I want to explain to you before I go into the specific programming is that because of the geographically and socioeconomically diverse nature of our students, in order to make this happen digitally and virtually, we had to ensure that all of our students had access to hardware and internet capabilities. We are dealing with students in the far reaches of Ghana, of India, of Brazil that might not have the access. So we had to ensure that. What we did was we worked with our AFS local representatives to ensure if there were any necessary equipment or technical needs that we address those with our students who are meeting those kind of capabilities. And on top of that, it's a global program. So we had to work across many, many different time zones. So we offered a variety of times for our students to be able to engage. And of course, we always recorded where they could watch afterwards. So we kicked off our program in July, where we really set the foundation of learnings related to diversity, inclusion, and social impact. And of course, bringing home the relevance to STEM. We had Zoom facilitated dialogue with specially trained facilitators from BP and from AFS. And we started with this AFS Effect, which was an interactive workshop which introduced the scholars to not only D&I type of related content, but really introduced them to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and showing them how they can impact their communities and society as a whole by addressing some of these goals. So to promote further understanding and importance of the SDGs, we broke the students up into small group project teams and culminated with video presentation submissions. The scholars were split in global teams and they focused on one SDG and explored how they could change the world and change their communities with addressing one of our SDGs. They culminated, like I said, in a video presentation and they were allowed to present to our BP leadership at a later date. Moving on to BP Week. So you can see that we are trying to make sure that we connect all the dots through their learnings to what we do back at BP. So during BP Week, we introduced the students to our 4 host countries, the ones that they will hopefully be going to in 2021. We kicked off the week with a virtual session with some of our top people and culture leaders, where the winners of our SDG products that I have mentioned got to present their findings, and we had a Q&A session. Each one of our countries then linked to the students also, where we further connected the dots with the importance of SDGs and what we as a company are doing to really help the world and our company get to net zero by 2050. We made sure that each session was engaging and interactive. We had virtual challenges. We did a virtual escape room. We talked about the importance of partnerships and we had team challenges. So there was a lot that we did to keep them engaged. Now, here we fast forward to, we want to keep the momentum going until they reach their on-site opportunities in next summer. So we also understand that these students are currently in school and have a large workload. So what we want to do is just offer a series of showcases and motivational speakers where they can really just check in at their own time. There's not going to be any work or deliverables at this point, but they can still come and connect with entrepreneurs, with BP people, and just keep the conversation going and really connect with each other, because that's really a benefit of this program, is that you've got 110 students across the globe sharing stories and sharing experiences. And so we just want to keep that connection going. Another that we're doing to really keep the program going is we have created a Facebook, if you will, for our scholars called AFS Connect. So it's a platform, it's a social platform where our AFS alumni connect, our AFS staff, BP, we can all engage and dialogue and keep building relationships. It's a way for us to show them continued engagement. We have global discussions online. We share BP news. We talk about exchanging innovative ideas, as well as share future opportunities that the students can look for within BP, like internships and scholarships. So all in all, our reinvented program has been eye-openingly a huge success. We've been able to extend the program, and we feel really build the depth of the program because of its global nature. Typically, a lot of our students would only get to experience the one country that they attended, but now our scholars have been exposed to all 4 host countries. They've been exposed to globally BP, globally AFS. They've been able to engage with each other across the globe. So we really have found that this is truly a piece of our academies that we want to keep going, and will in fact for the next years be working with these opportunities to have virtual connections, because the cost-effective way of managing this, it's like a nice add-on to all of the programs. And this is a way that we can keep our students in our talent pipeline and tell them everything new that's going on within BP, as well as hear from them and get innovative ideas from them. So we're really pleased with all of that. And that in a nutshell is our program, and that's how we did it. And I want to thank you for allowing me to be here.
Awesome, Cindy. Thank you very much. That is, I take away a few things that, like you guys, your pivot was very thoughtful. The pivot enabled you to expand your offerings overall in the future, which is really cool. So, turning lemons into lemonade is, I think that's what we've all been trying to do this year. Really great partner too in AFS. They have been a great partner. I've been following this partnership since the very beginning, and it seems like a leadership-driven idea that you guys have been able to develop into something that is a real amazing program and opportunity for students. So thank you very much. So let me get my screen back up here again, and then I'll turn it off. And we are all right. So our next 2 speakers, we have 2 speakers for the next segment, Lori Anderson and Kathy Amirati from the Micron Technology Foundation. Lori Anderson is manager of K-12 STEM education outreach programs. And in this role, she manages Micron's K-12 STEM education outreach program through the Micron Foundation. She has been with this group since 2006. She's involved with the Idaho STEM Action Center Foundation Board, chairs the Boise Metro Chamber of Education and Workforce Committee, First Robotics, is a member of the Idaho Business for Education, and most recently served on the Governor's Digital Divide Task Force. So very involved in this issue, very knowledgeable. And Kathy Amirati is the STEM Diversity Outreach Manager at Micron Gives Foundation. And in this role, she leads STEM outreach for underrepresented groups, including women and minority populations, and provides opportunities for all students to see STEM in their future. She supports access to STEM education to students that may not have STEM programs readily available. And she's dedicated nearly 10 years to improving STEM learning through Micron Gives Foundation. She also serves on the board of the Discovery Center of Idaho and has been extremely involved in the Boise community. So Kathy and Lori, I will turn it over to you. I'm going to stop my share. There you go.
Great, thank you, Ted. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think it's up, is that right? Great,
yes,
thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you for inviting us to tell our story about our virtual summer camp pivot. We are honored to have been included. Kathy and I are part of the Inspire Learning team within the Micron Foundation. Our mission is to innovate, accelerate, educate, growing a diverse and robust STEM pipeline to cultivate tomorrow's technology leaders. So first, let's look at the impact of STEM summer camps. Even though these events are sometimes one and done affairs, studies have shown that participation does increase students' awareness and interest in STEM, especially at that middle school level. It really gets them excited about STEM and introduces them to STEM careers at a pivotal point in their education. In Micron's in-person STEM camp, surveys of over 800 campers showed that 68% of them reported that their interest in science or engineering had increased. We also get emails from parents after camp stating that this experience truly sparked a passion in their child to go on to pursue a career in science. And we even have team members at Micron who are alumni of our camps, and they make the best volunteers. So a little history about where we started. More than 20 years ago, a Micron visionary was motivated to start a science camp because her son had attended one in another state, and it sparked his passion in science and led him to a career as a chemist. Our CHIP camp is a free STEM summer camp for middle school students. It has grown to serve over 400 students per year in 2 locations. Activities are in the classroom, outside, and even include a day at Micron. These activities include programming, launching paper rockets, silver mirror chemistry, and many things in between, all led by Micron team member volunteers. And all these volunteers are trained by the Inspire Learning team. The key impact strategies of the camp have been to spark a passion for STEM in middle school students and to expose students to content knowledge in a relevant, hands-on way. We also wanted to introduce students to both the content areas of the semiconductor industry, as well as specifically introduce them to what Micron makes, how it's made, and the people who make it. Of course, any type of program like this has an intent to build that STEM pipeline, but not just for us, but for STEM in general. And then there is the social impact. This is a free camp open to any student, helping us to give back to our community. Now, 2020 was to be the 20th anniversary of CHIP Camp. We thought that was pretty cool, 20th anniversary in 2020. So we were planning a huge celebration. The global pandemic, however, had a much different plan. In March 2020, our staff was sent home, but we still held out hope that we would have a live CHIP camp starting June 2nd. Thought we'd just be out a few weeks. Our registration was set to open April 13th, but the first week of April, we received news that neither our locations or our volunteers would be available for an in-person event. So we needed to pivot to virtual. We're part of the Micron Foundation, where another one of our pillars is to support basic human needs. As you can imagine, the COVID crisis saw us scrambling on every front to maximize Micron's resources for good. Our new motto became never waste a good crisis. We had to figure out how to make the best of this crisis and pivot our hugely successful CHIP camp into an online experience. So Kathy and I soon became the resident Zoom experts and best friends with our Zoom IT support. So how did we do this? Where did we start? First, we had to look at what our core values were with our in-person camp. Hands-on activities in our camps is key. We did not want to sacrifice that experience. We also wanted to keep the connection to Micron in the industry, which is a unique focus of this camp. Our camps have always maintained small group dynamics, which are so important for hands-on learning and getting a real relationship with the mentors. This is such a vital part of the camp, having the students meet real-life STEM professionals. We definitely wanted to keep our strong volunteer mentorship experience alive. Beyond that, we needed to understand what the best practices were for this new virtual learning world and how we needed to upskill to succeed at the task. We attended several webinars last spring, of course, didn't we all, trying to figure this out, and benchmarked with our partners in the same space to see what was working and what wasn't. We even attended a couple of camps ourselves. Kathy attended a programming camp with her daughter, and I took advantage of one of our partners' offerings of a camp that provided a hands-on experience. Both were very valuable experiences in considering how to structure our camp. We have 20 years of experience of running a successful in-person camp, but needed to reach out to experts in the field to find out best practices and to learn what were the most effective virtual teaching methods. The most extensive upskilling had to do with navigating the virtual platform. There is so much more, as we all know, to running a professional, smoothly run Zoom experience than you would ever expect. We pivoted one of our Girls Going Tech events to a virtual experience in May, which provided us plenty of learning opportunities to figure out what we didn't know and what we had to learn. And the materials, while we needed to understand how to best deploy the materials that would be needed so that we could stay with our goal of hands-on activities. After considering these and many more factors, we were then ready to come up with a design for the camp. In our in-person camp, we had a focused curriculum. It's targeted at the core science areas utilized in the semiconductor industry. We had 20 years of experience with a successful camp design and needed to consider how to adapt that expertise for the virtual world. What were the activities we already had? What kind of things did we already do well? Which of these things could be easily adapted for virtual learning, and how could we do that? The lessons needed to be something that could be done at home, something that could be easily explained, and the materials needed to be something that could be shipped in a kit. Because when we deploy for our in-person camp, we literally load a moving van with all of our materials. But for the virtual camp, the materials needed to be easily sourced, non-hazardous, so we could ship them, and had to fit in a small bag. Another adaptation was we decided to have a different theme for each day, and that would provide continuity across the camp. And in the true spirit of not wasting a good crisis, we explored all of the silver linings of doing a virtual camp. For one thing, our career awareness aspect could be very intentional. Instead of just introducing the students to someone by name, degree, and job function, we now had a captive audience, so we could inject specific career awareness videos into each day. Each activity became something that the students could keep, because typically in our in-person camp, it produces disposable group projects. But this was an opportunity for the students to individually create something and then use the parts or the kit to scaffold to further learning opportunities. But undeniably, the best enhancement of the virtual experience is that we were able to get participants, both students and volunteers, from anywhere in the country. We greatly expanded our reach, which was huge. So the final design for the camp looked something like this. In our original camp, our in-person camp is 3 days, and we decided to keep that, but we went with only 3 hours per day instead of a full day. And so if you look at the 3 days, on the first day was all about Micron. We had 2 activities, one, how we make memory, and the second, how we use memory, where they build a solid state drive out of Legos. The second day was all about computing and computer science careers. We learned binary and learned to program a microbit, which is a small device that they could then use to program throughout the summer and into school. The third day was our engineering day. We had scaffolded activities where they learned to design a circuit, and then they went on to do an engineering design. So each day had some specialty things. The first day was great. We could include about Micron's history, but also we had a recorded welcome from the CEO. And that was exciting because that's not always able to occur when we have the in-person camp. On the third day, we were able to include a live guest speaker. On one of those days, it actually was our CEO, but the other weeks we were able to get people from all over the country. So that made it pretty exciting. And then each day included some career spotlight videos that featured our Micron tech professionals. That ended up being a really great thing because whenever there were, or if there were any technical difficulties, as everybody finds that they have and during Zoom events, we could just insert one of those videos in there and we would have about 4 or 5 minutes to figure things out. Each one of these activities was hands-on, so we had to design both the curriculum and the materials to be very kid-friendly. So here's what our kits looked like. So this picture shows what it was included in each camp box. Each of the 6 activities was packaged into a 6x9 sealable bag with uniform labeling of everything that was in the bag. Each day was color-coded so that it was easily identifiable. There was also a packet of activity papers, which helped give additional information and guidance for the corresponding activity, and also color-coded to the day. Of course, no camp would be complete without branded swag and a t-shirt. Just because the camp was virtual didn't mean the students couldn't have a t-shirt. Many of them wore the shirts during the Zoom meetings, which was a lot of fun. Once the boxes were stuffed, they were loaded up and delivered to the post office. And here you can see Kathy's car loaded up for one of the many trips she took to the post office. Now, Kathy's going to talk about the reflections on our virtual pivot and the impacts it made.
Thanks, Lori. So like she said, I'm going to share a little bit about our different approach, specifically about reaching out to students, recruiting and training volunteers, and making the technology work for all of us. So we had 4 different weeks of camp, and what you're seeing here is actual screenshots of students and volunteers. We first started out with a basic outreach plan, which in an in-person camp, of course, it was local, and we're in Boise, Idaho. Quickly, we expanded to other Micron communities. We realized that we wanted to expand our reach. And then in the 4th week, we deliberately sought out partners that already had established relationships with students in underrepresented populations. And the students needed to have technology. So we were given support from our CEO to solve any kind of technology problems for those students. And so we didn't have to reach as far as Cindy mentioned with her BP outreach. We weren't global, but we were nationwide. So we ended up shipping laptops to students in California, tribal lands in Idaho and Nevada, and students all the way out in Maryland. Now, the volunteers, we knew we wanted to expand our outreach, and we needed to also do a little bit more in the area of training. In our in-person camp, some volunteers could sign up and just lean on those experienced volunteers because we were all in the room together. But in this case, we used Zoom breakout rooms. So we had 1 volunteer to 4 to maybe 6 students. So we really had to be sure that those volunteers were comfortable teaching the content, and also that they understood that they were directly interacting with these students. So in a benefit, the volunteers were more engaged. Technology-wise, we were using Zoom. So Lori and I had a crash course on Zoom with tremendous help from our Micron IT Zoom team. And then again, the training for the volunteers had to make sure they knew about all the different tools with sharing their screens. And whenever we did a training, we showed them about, the annotation process and other things. And we also learned from them for those that started to play around with a little bit more. And then in terms of helping the students understand, we included a Zoom tips, a couple of slides and we practiced the different Zoom tools that we were using for the students. And so we really wanted to make sure that there was the best interaction that we could find. So next slide, Lori. This is a slide with a little more example of what we did for equity. And the 4th week specifically, we reached out beyond our borders. We kind of pushed to every corner of the country that we could find. We ended up actually also having a student attend from Canada. The logos you see under Opportunity Equity, these were organizations that we partnered with throughout the year, and we were seeking their assistance to reach out to students that possibly hadn't ever attended a STEM camp before. So in terms of numbers, we had 22% of our students were Native American from the tribal lands. 87% identified themselves as non-white participants. And so Idaho itself is 93% Caucasian. So we knew that if we wanted to have a more diverse set of students, we had to go outside of Idaho. And then on the right side, we almost had a 50% female participation, which was really awesome. In the end, we had campers come from 9 different states. We had volunteers that were from every different Micron location. And then from there, we had to consider all aspects of equity. So I already mentioned the devices. When a student received a laptop from Micron, that was one of the benefits we were able to do. I set up a pre-meeting with them to make sure that they could log in, that they knew how to get to Zoom, the connectivity was working fine for them. And it was a neat opportunity to connect directly with those students and their guardians and help them understand what was taking place in the coming days for them. So next slide, Lori. In the end, we wanted to make sure that we were still having a positive impact and helping students see that there is a future in STEM for them. So in using the Zoom tool, we had polling that we were able to use, and we used it to check the students' interests at the start and the end of camp. So here's the result from the start of camp. The green slice is showing that there's some students that either didn't know or were not interested. And if I remember the numbers right, it was about split, that 16%, 8% didn't even know what a STEM career was, and 8% were not interested. And so our goal, like I said, was to try to get some of those green into the purple or the blue. And then next slide. The impact, so in the end, we asked 2 different questions. We believe we were successful because if you look at that green slice, it went from 16% to 12%. So we had the ability to share information. So we felt that every student at least knew what a STEM career was, and then increase their interest was the next goal. So we have a lot of different anecdotes about what really worked. We had one camper that was attending from her bedroom. Her sister was in another room in the house, and these were 2 that actually both received devices from Micron. She volunteered to share her programming example from day 2, and as she talked through it, you could hear in the background her family cheering her on, and it was great. It was topped off by her sister coming off of mute and saying, "Shout out to my sis." So it was kind of a community event, even though we weren't all together. And another great example was a camper just shared with no prompting from us that he's sure now that his future, he's going to be an engineer. So feel like successes all around. Next slide, Lori. This is just our information. So Ted did a great job introducing us already. Lori and I would be happy to get emails from you, answer your questions. You'll also see the K-12 programs. That's our generic email if there's some more open-ended questions that you have about our programs. But we really appreciate the opportunity here to share, and thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lori and Kathy. That was a great presentation. And I see some questions are coming in, which is great. Well, as I said, we'll address these, we'll answer them at the end. And I think what I do like is the questions kind of cut across all the presentations. So that's great. Awesome. So last year, we welcomed West Virginia University as a member of STEM Connector, and I had the opportunity to go and visit last fall, and I was able to meet also our next speaker in person. Let me bring her picture up. And Jen Robertson Honoker is Dr. Jennifer Robertson Honoker is PhD, is a West Virginia University Extension Service Associate Professor and STEM Specialist, and she directs Smile and STEM Care. So I always think of Jen as the person who's getting out there across the state and working with youth in evidence-based ways, and a big part of that is camp. So when it comes to reaching more than 88,000 West Virginia youth through 4-H, technology, science, technology, engineering, and math initiatives, Jen Robertson Honoker says the formula is simple. You have to make learning relatable and fun. As a STEM specialist for West Virginia University's Extension Service, 4-H Youth Development Program, Robertson Honoker does just that. She brings science programming to kids in rural communities through camp programs, events in school and out of school time activities. And in addition, she trains a variety of educators, so train the trainer, and implements and evaluates statewide 4-H programs and curriculum. She has a PhD in analytical chemistry and a background in both collegiate and public school teaching, and she uses her real-world knowledge to create relatable, effective curricula for rural youth. Jen is the PI on 2 national 4-H Google Awards, the Establishing a CS Pathway for America's Youth and Computer Science Innovator Grants, And in 2018, she led the WVU extension team that worked with National 4-H and Google to write the National Youth Science Day Challenges, Code Your World and Game Changers, which reached more than 500,000 youth across the country. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this to you, Jen, and let you get going.
Thank you. Let me share my screen and get this PowerPoint started. All right, well, thank you so much for asking me to be on today. I've already learned a lot from our two featured speakers. You know, I think some of the things that I'm going to share are going to complement that very well, and perhaps answer some of those questions that I saw about Zoom fatigue, internet stability, and things like that, that we also addressed in the state of West Virginia. So I am the STEM specialist for West Virginia University's Extension Service. So that does primarily put me in West Virginia, but we do some national and regional work as well. I will say in West Virginia and with our 4-H program, camping is huge. It's not always the case in all 4-H programs, but in West Virginia, it's huge. In fact, we had the very first overnight 4-H camp in our state over 100 years ago at Camp Frame. And each summer, more than 6,000 kids attend summer camps. So we have one in every single county. And in fact, many counties have multiple. And then we also have state level camps. We have the very first national, for National 4-H, we had the very first state facility for camping. For us, it's Jackson's Mill, which was built in about the 1920s. So we have a lot of kids that come in for that. But then we also run regional camps in our universities. So WVU has 3 different sister sites. So we actually bring kids to the college to give them that college experience. So when COVID hit, this was really hard for West Virginia, and there were, you know, you could just see the Facebook posts of, you know, across the state of kids who are already missing out by being at home, you know, seeing that they weren't going to make that annual trip to either their county or the state level 4-H facility. So we really tried to think hard about ways that we could meet that need. So we did a couple different things, and I'm going to describe several of those here, some of our general camps, as well as specifically STEM, so this is STEM Connector. And some of those were virtual, but we also had some at-home versions because West Virginia is a very rural state and we do have issues with connectivity. So the camps themselves varied from virtual 5-day events that really mimicked a typical 4-H camp and really sound a lot like what was happening in our 2 previous presenters. But then we also created some subject-specific, what we call special interest or spin clubs that met weekly over the course of the month. And I'll talk about the pros and cons of both of these types of ways to address this. So let's talk about the typical camp first. So in West Virginia, the vast majority of those 100 camps we offer each summer that hit those 6,000 youth are county-based camps, which are anywhere from Clover Bud day camps, that's your kindergarten, first, second grader, to our traditional 4-H'er, which runs from 3rd grade to 8th grade, but we also go all the way through K-12. In fact, we have campers up to the age of 21. So we often have our college students as well. So every one of our 55 counties ran a virtual version called Camped UR Linked, so which was a really fun play on URL. And this allowed every county to have some sort of a template to run for their local level, but also they could individualize it for their county. So we provided things that would make it easy for them to run these in their communities. So since these were very centralized to the location, those camps were a mix of virtual, at-home, and distance learning. And what I'll say with distance learning within the community, it created things that could get kids out of the house, but weren't necessarily connected to a computer. So there were things like geocaching or scavenger hunts, which were safe to do outside in person. but not around other people. And then kids would upload things to Facebook or other types of social media for interaction. Many of the camps or many of the counties distributed what we call camp in a box. So I thought it was funny that our previous speaker also had the car pick full of boxes. So this was our agent in Pocahontas County, which is not only a very rural county, but it also houses Green Bank Observatory. So they don't have cell service or internet because of the fact that this radio telescope is there. So it's really hard to reach kids over internet. So they had to provide at-home ability for kids to do things. So this is her pickup truck that she used to distribute those camps in a box. Now, as I mentioned, the county-based camps were mimicking a typical camp, 5 days a week, and they had activities throughout the day. Some of them utilized social media types of interactive apps like Padlet. So Padlet is a great resource to be able to really lay out your camp. And it allows for both asynchronous and synchronous learning, so kids can do things independently. It is, because it's app-based, kids can use a laptop or a Chromebook or a phone or an iPad, which if you look at the research by Gallup and Google, if you're trying to reach rural communities, if you're trying to reach inner city minorities, they usually have far more access to things like a phone than they do a computer. So these are nice because they can interact with between either of those. So there's a lot of information here. It looks a little overwhelming. It's just a screenshot, but kids could go in and out and choose the activities they wanted to. Some things were pre-recorded, some things that they could upload their information to have interactivity. But it really kind of laid out the week. Now, what I'll say, the nice thing about running a camp in this way is that, again, you have high interactivity, high engagement in a short time period. It's easier for people running the activities because everything's done in 1 week. However, as people have asked, it does create things like Zoom fatigue. So we also created events that were more spread out over a longer period of time. And that's really what we focused on as a STEM team for our virtual activities. So we had, these were things that kids could opt into based on their interest. So this was one of our examples of our special interest clubs. So we call them clubs rather than camps, since they met over an extended period of time. For this one, kids met 1 hour a week for 7 weeks. It had guest speakers, they had virtual field trips. In our STEM activities, we try to incorporate some sort of interactive learning technology. Again, all of these were those that could be accessed from either computers, iPads, phones, again, to increase access and equity. So the two that they used there were iNaturalist and Seek, which allowed kids to find things from their backyard, like a picture of a plant, and submit it, and it would come back and tell them what they had, or they could do things like looking for crawfish or crawdads, as we like to call them here, and other ways to interact with their own environment. So it was both virtual, but getting kids outside. They had hands-on activities where they designed a water filter, and students posted their weekly projects on Padlet. And I will say it will have a final lessons learned. I highly recommend using ways for kids to get interactive with one another if you're going to mimic a virtual activity like these. Now, one thing that we've been doing a lot in West Virginia is coding. So I do everything from chemistry to coding. Whatever is needed is what we've been doing. But lately, we've been spending a lot of time on computer science. So we decided to create these game design coding clubs. And we actually started this before the summer began. So with my own children, they were at the time 4th and 8th grade. When school ended, you know, there was a lot of free time on their hands, and they were also really socially isolated. So we created these clubs in the hopes that we'd get maybe 50 kids to participate. We had over 400 kids register in 1 week. So we quickly knew we had to do something bigger. So we created a total of 5 different clubs that ran between May and June. We had a total of 350 youth participate. in total. So, and those were 3rd through 8th grade. We also had additional workshops later for kids that were 6th through 12th that were higher level thinking and activities like used text-based code and so forth. These used CS First and Scratch. And so we would have 2 of those sessions each week for 4 weeks. So kids got a total of 8 hours of learning for direct through us through virtual, but they also had a lot of independent learning on the side as they were turning in their projects and working on them later. So for this, we sent out a parent survey to see what parents felt of these clubs. And the one thing that I think when we talk about silver linings, you know, when you bring a kid to camp, a lot of times the parents are just, they have no idea what's going on, right? You know, sometimes we try to send out Facebook posts and maybe your kid will answer your questions in the car ride home after camp. But a lot of times it's really a black box. You have no idea what your children were learning. The wonderful thing about these virtual clubs is you could see moms, dads, grandmas sitting alongside their child, learning along with them. When kids would upload their projects, often, you know, you would see the parent involvement, and it really became a whole family affair, which I just think was wonderful. So some of the things that parents said, you know, they love the flexibility. So one of the things that we did, and when we talk about internet stability and rural access, is really bad in West Virginia. And so we archived every single webinar meeting and sent that out in an email immediately after the meeting ended. So if for some reason their internet conked out, they just couldn't meet for some reason, they had something else to do, they had a whole week to catch up before the next meeting. So we did that with everything. And kids accessed via every kind of technology you can think of. We had kids on phones, we had kids on smartphones, we had kids on Chromebooks and iPads. Any way that they could access, they did. And a lot of them just talked about, you know, how eager the kids were to be involved, not only learning, but also interacting with the other children. So to broaden the access, much like the others mentioned, you know, typically we're just dealing with West Virginia, and we're often just dealing with certain kinds of kids in West Virginia. For these clubs, 76% of the participants were new to 4-H, and that we hardly ever see that. Typically at our camps, we're talking about kids who are already 4-H members. Now, it's open to anyone. It's just hard for people to hear about them, and they just, you know, maybe they don't have the means to travel there, or the schedule doesn't work out. But in this way, we were able to reach a far broader swath of West Virginia. But not only that, we reached kids from 8 other states, and we also had some participants from Canada as well. It was the first coding experience for 52% of those participants, which is exactly what we were looking for, broadening access. And so we were really proud of that. So one of the things they asked us to talk about is the sort of that role of mentorship during the meetings. And in this case, I'm specifically talking about our prolonged clubs. So these clubs, again, were either meeting 1 hour once a week, or 1 hour twice for over 2 different times. So 2 hours a week, but 2 different times, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays over 4 weeks. And so that gave us a lot of time to get to know these kids and spend time with them, and you know, really get to learn the material, but also get to learn about them. So, you know, we really try to encourage throughout our meetings, you know, interest and exposure. So increasing awareness about computer science and the type of, you know, the representation. We had guest speakers, we had people of color, we had primarily females leading the activities. So that gave good representation. We were looking, you know, we would provide examples of diverse computer scientists in the media and history. You know, we tried to be very careful about the ways that we expressed STEM and how we talked about it to really broaden the way the kids think about it. And we also worked with a lot of materials that were available online, but had a lot of strong built-in support for independent learning. I think if you're going to have something like this, especially for new audiences, you really want to make sure that support's built in so that the kids feel comfortable. So just a few last pieces here. I did talk about how rural access is very difficult in West Virginia. I don't know if many of you read the Wall Street Journal article from September focusing on Logan, West Virginia. But you know, in our state, 30 to 50% of K-12 students lack internet access at home, and that was a big problem for us. I've mentioned a few of these already, but a few tips for that. So Zoom, we didn't really have any Zoom issues, but sometimes if students had low bandwidth, their internet got a little glitchy in the streaming. If you have your students turn off their video, that does help with that, because the video part, their own video, their camera takes up some bandwidth. We, again, as I already mentioned, we recorded all of the meetings and shared with the group immediately afterward. And we also made sure all of the programs that we used, like Scratch and CS First, have an offline component. So we made sure that families knew that they could do these things offline if needed. Finally, mobile-friendly learning activities are really helpful for minorities and rural youth, because they usually have far more access to those types of devices than they do a computer. Final lessons learned here, I would say, you know, we didn't run anything longer than 2 hours. Our audience skewed far younger than the two previous presenters, but kids do get zoomed out. So I would say 1 hour for kids younger than 5th grade. Collaborate with fellow educators. Don't be afraid to do this. You don't have to have all the answers. We learned together with youth and modeled a growth mindset. And we used a lot of teens to help us in the learning, which was a great role model for kids. Finally, my last big tip is to always find ways to showcase youth work and provide means for social interaction. The one we're using right now is Flipgrid, which is just amazing. I'm actually going to be running a club session tonight, and the kids' videos are just really wonderful. So we love using something like this to help kids interact and stay together. So finally, I do have resources. We've been training educators. So if you'd like to visit our Google Drive, I have a lot of fun things for you that you can learn more. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was fantastic. And I do see we're kind of up against our the edge of our hour. So rather than take this to questions, since I don't think we'll have time to address them, I do see Lori has been answering them. And Cindy, I did see you interacting with folks in the chat window. We have archived all the questions, and we'll be working on a, you know, I'll try to connect with you all so we can get questions answered. I do just want to share quickly, if I can find it here, my next week. We don't have anything next week to share from a webinar perspective, but it is going to be our Million Women Mentors Summit next week. So I hope you will plan to join us. Let's see why this is not coming.
I'm putting a direct link to the QR code
Perfect.
right now.
So I can't seem to get my my Zoom, my Chrome to share. So I'll just take, because we've got a minute left. Next week is our Million Women Mentors Summit. Just Google Million Women Mentors Summit, and you will come. There's a registration page. It is free. We have Valerie Jarrett, who some of you may know is a pretty famous mentor to President Obama. We have Dr. David Celentano from Johns Hopkins University, Governor Gina Raimondo from Rhode Island. We have, I think, Governor Kate Brown from Oregon. We have Chris Brown from NASA Office of STEM Engagement. So a lot of great speakers, some panels, and some opportunities to understand skills-based volunteering around mentoring. I just encourage you to join us. And then the other, we have a work-based learning focus on switching to virtual and work-based learning webinar coming up on November 9th, and we've confirmed Abbott, and we're waiting on a couple more, but you should receive correspondence about that. So if you did sign up today with your email, you will receive future correspondence, and you will receive follow-up. So thank you so much to everybody who presented today. These are really amazing resources, and look forward to answering all your questions. And I very much appreciate everybody who tuned in today. So thank you.